Your Excellencies actually, members of the diplomatic corps, team from Climate Ready, ladies and gentlemen. Currently, the permutation of climate finance is on an 80-20 basis. In other words, 80% of all the climate funds that are available goes towards mitigation. Only 20% is actually allocated for adaptation, which really is a huge challenge indeed for many countries like Fiji and the other Pacific Island countries, where frankly the money is required primarily and fundamentally for adaptation as opposed to mitigation. The carbon footprint of most Pacific Island countries, including many other smaller countries in the world, is almost negligible. However, they are the cold face of climate change. So they are the ones who need to actually adapt a lot more quickly to the effects and the ravages of climate change. So adaptation needs a huge focus in these countries. So the Climate Ready office being set up here obviously is quite timely. There is obviously, as has been highlighted, a need to build a capacity within these countries to be able to have the soft skills required to access climate adaptation finance in particular, but also to be able to understand the effects of climate change vis-a-vis the adaptation. I think there's one point I would like to make is that in the adaptation framework, one of the things that we do continuously find now, in a country like Fiji, it's not the issue about not having or the inability to implement the funds, but it's more the ability to be able to recognize people who actually can carry out the adaptation projects. So in other words, I'm talking about more private sector participation in the adaptation space. We generally find that in adaptation, there's an assumption that it's always not just public finance that will do the adaptation, but also is that it'll be the homegrown construction companies, for example, homegrown or local or regional organizations that will carry out the adaptation progress. The reality is that many of the many of the companies do not necessarily have the right access to technology, nor do they necessarily have the capacity to be able to implement those adaptation projects. So I hope that through this office also, you will be as part of your Pillar 2 and 3 objectives, that you'll also be able to help connect many of these Pacific Island countries with private sector organizations which can bring in the new technology. So for example, the current status of many construction companies in Fiji is very limited in terms of the adaptation of new methodologies and technologies to use to build homes, for example, to be able to have that level of resilience built into the capital works. Similarly, whether it's roads or water, etc. And I hope that that's something that your office, good office, can do. There is no doubt that it is actually a bureaucratic nightmare and a maze to actually access adaptation finance. It does take a long time. In fact, there are only very few organizations that are accredited. So I'd like to also point out that Fiji Development Bank has also put in an application. The Fijian government has nominated FDB to become a accredited organization. Once that accreditation comes along, I think we'll have a lot of work for Climate Ready to be able to develop those soft skills within the Fiji Development Bank for their personnel to be able to then become a conduit, not just for adaptation, accessibility, adaptation finance for projects within Fiji, but possibly outside Fiji. We indeed can assist other Pacific Island countries to be the conduit. I think as I highlighted, the issue is to be able to develop the soft skills with our personnel, the public officials, to be able to access those finance. But I think it is also very important to, again, build capacity within the private sector as far as adaptation is concerned. This is very welcome, of course, and we're here to, of course, help you, to serve you. Fiji, as you know, offers, as you rightly pointed out, the hub status does offer many opportunities for organizations such as this, because you're able to very quickly, down the road is UNDP and down the other way is WHO and various other organizations that can actually help your organizations and develop the synergies quite easily without necessarily having to trek vast miles to be able to access them. I'd like to finally just round off by again emphasizing the fact that Fiji has been given the honor of having the COP23 presidency. It is one of those unique situations where, whilst we are hosting it, we are not physically actually hosting it. We have the presidency. I'd like to, of course, thank the Germans for the very generous hosting of actually physically hosting COP23. They're spending in excess of about 70 million euros to be able to actually host COP23. Fiji has been given the task of ensuring that we further the rule book coming out of the Paris Agreement, to ensure that we continue to work and in fact strengthen the climate action agenda, in particular working with civil society, with the private sector also. And we believe that one of the focuses we would like to bring is to ensure that we get more private sector participation in the climate change space. Of course, we'd also like to encourage all of you representing different organizations or different interest groups to work with us to ensure that the current political discourse that perhaps is conjuring up a lot of different ways of thinking regarding Paris Agreement, that we don't actually deviate from Paris Agreement. We need to forge ahead on that path. We also need to bring in all the different stakeholders on a global level. The third focus, of course, as we have said, as announced by the Honourable Prime Minister, we'll have a huge focus on trying to get the world to think and to actually practically implement and change the current skewed permutation of the 80-20, and get not necessarily increase the pool of funds, but to have the permutation change, so at least we shift from perhaps a 80-20 to at least first steps 70-30. And I think we would be able to make those changes. And the reality is that if this global phenomena is not addressed, and as I said at the forum a couple of weeks ago overseas, that it's not just about a few small countries being washed away or losing their sovereignty perhaps, but it's also about the entire survivability of the human race and how we live our lives. It's also for private companies a question about sustained profits. Sustained commercial realities will actually mean, if you're planning 20 years down the track, if you do not address this issue now, then you'll actually have a huge impact on all aspects of our lives. So we look forward to all your support. I'd like to once again congratulate Climate Ready Office for opening up here, and thank the American government for setting up the office here through USAID. We'd like to work, of course, very closely with you because we all need to address this particular phenomenon. Thank you. Naka.